This is the fastest transmigration I've ever seen. Two girls were robbed by a knife-wielding gangster. The male protagonist wanted to save the beauty. He directly tackled the robber. But he hit the robber's knife directly and was directly sent to another world. When the male lead opened his eyes, he was suddenly splashed with facial cleanser by a young mother. He was confused, but as a light novel enthusiast, the male lead understood. He had crossed over, so he decided to observe his surroundings first. Of course, the most important thing, he still needs to check if his little brother was still there. At this time, the maid opened the door, thinking the boy peed his pants. So she quickly took off his pants to check. Then the maid began to feed the male lead. So he took the opportunity to inquire about various information. First, the male lead is 3 years old, born into an aristocratic family, named Canum, who is a border earl with his own army, and has 2 wives. The mother of the male lead is called Sarah, the second lady, and a 2.5-year-old sister, Renee. The father's first wife is Maria. She gave birth to 2 sons, Jean and Iraq. The male lead also learned from the maid that there are not only monsters and adventurers in this world, people here can use magic. After hearing about magic, he made up his mind to live a good life in this world. After all, in his previous life, his only family member, his grandfather, passed away, leaving him alone. So, the male lead had almost no nostalgia for his previous world. After learning that the male lead could read and do math, his father praised him for being very smart. Of course, it was because he was a high school student. Then his mother also said that he might be a genius. But the male lead with high emotional intelligence, he quickly said that it was the maid who taught him well. But it also aroused suspicion from his family. They feel that he has changed after the fever. Could it be that he was affected by the weather? The male lead explained. He just wanted to learn about various things in the world. So he studied hard. After learning that the male lead was interested in magic, everyone was happy. But they also thought he was too young. He should be like his sister. He should learn after being baptized at the age of 5. However, what they didn't expect was that the male lead had just read the magic book. For 2.5 hours, he was able to release the magic of Wu Yinchang. But since it was his first time using magic, he accidentally went too far. Just then, the maid who heard the noise opened the door, which made the male protagonist quickly put away magic. He lied that he was fine, but didn't notice that his sister Lainey slipped in quietly. Seeing the male lead's guilty expression, Sister Lainey guessed that the male lead must be secretly learning about the outside world. So she volunteered to tutor him herself. In this way, Lainey became the male lead's tutor. She comes to the male lead's room every day to teach him. Soon 2.5 years passed. The male lead finally turned 5 years old. According to the custom of nobles, his father not only took him to accept the baptism of the gods, but also take him to make his debut in the territory. Although the outside world dazzled him, but the male lead was more curious about the god baptism. Instead of explaining, she directly opened the attribute interface. Although his sister's stats are average, she has a strange attribute of loving her younger brother. Good guy, the ground control is real. So the male lead tried to change the subject. He quickly asked about blessings and magic. The magic power required to cast magic or skills is closely related to the blessing. In short, the higher the level, the higher the quality. Soon, the male lead followed his family to the church. Here are 7 gods of creation. The so-called baptism is to report to the 7 gods in front of you. Ping'an has grown to 5 years old, but at this moment, the male lead suddenly heard the laughter of an old man, and the statues also glowed at the same time. This scene stunned everyone present. When the male protagonist came to his senses, the 7 gods really appeared in front of him. They not only said they had been waiting for a long time, but also knew his name before reincarnation, which scared the male protagonist. He was completely confused about the current situation. Just when the male lead was at a loss, the goddess named Lime revealed the truth about the male lead's death. It turned out that his death was purely accidental, because according to the script, even if he didn't help, the criminal would have fallen down by himself, and then be controlled by the people around. Although it sounds like the male lead died in vain, the criminal was even more miserable than the male lead. He just wanted to rob a convenience store. But he met the male lead, a jerk, which made the criminal be punished more severely, and became a murderer. But the male lead died because of doing good deeds. So the gods of the earth asked them, reincarnate the male lead into this world. And in order to give the male lead a happy childhood, they had originally sealed the male lead's breastfeeding and the pain of changing diapers. But for some reason, were inexplicably unlocked when he was 3 years old. So to apologize, the god of creation tried to give him the highest level of blessing. When it was the old man's turn to give the blessing, he insisted on keeping it a secret, and also let out a lewd laugh. With a dazzling light, the male lead returned to the church. The situation just now had never happened in history. So, the old man thought the male lead should have gained many abilities, and couldn't wait to see the protagonist's abilities. But the male lead suddenly covered his stomach, and ran out under the pretext of going to the toilet. And when he hid, he just opened the attribute panel. He was scared by himself. The god not only gave him all attribute magic, but also maxed out all the stats. The male lead didn't want to be known as a cheater, so he used the creation magic given by the creator. He modified the attributes. When he got home, the family began to celebrate the hero's 5th birthday. At this time, the father asked again what abilities the protagonist had gained, because he had modified his attributes. So he confidently showed it to his father. But it's better not to show. The father was directly frightened. He didn't expect his youngest son to be a cheat. And his magic power is hundreds of times that of ordinary people. Top magicians only have about 10,000. What's more, the protagonist is only 5 years old. And the most outrageous thing is that the prop box and identification skills were maxed out. In this way, he can be the best in any career he chooses. In order to prevent the country from discovering him as a threat, the father ordered everyone present to keep the secret. Then the boy returned to his room. He suddenly saw a summoning book on the bed. So in order to summon a furry little animal, he immediately ran to the open space to summon. He thought it would be smooth, but he summoned an ugly demon. This scared the male lead. This ugly thing was not cute at all. But at this moment, his sister and younger sister suddenly appeared, ready to die. The male lead knew this was a good opportunity to show off. So the male lead decided to give it a go. Although he successfully sent the demon away, but the male lead also fell down. The sisters, who thought the man was dead, they also cried sadly. However, only 2.5 tears fell. The male lead suddenly came back to life. After all, he was protected by 7 gods. He couldn't die easily. The next day, at the birthday party of the male lead, since the male lead was the 3rd child in the family, he couldn't inherit the family business. So his father asked him what he wanted to do in the future. The male lead said he wanted to see a wider world. If possible, he wanted to conquer a harem of various races, and then become a great adventurer. Soon the next day came. The father decided to hire 2 tutors for the male lead. After 2.5 hours of waiting, the maid told the male lead that the tutors had arrived. The excited male lead flashed to the window directly, and then threw himself into the teacher's arms, and started to greet each other with facial cleanser. When they entered the room, the teacher introduced himself. The red-haired one is Kini, and the green-haired one is called Taimei. They were both D-level adventurers. Then they took the male lead to the training ground. They started with swordsmanship training. Kini asked the male lead to swing his sword freely, but as soon as the male lead swung his sword, Kuni was shocked. Taimei also thought that the male lead's swordsmanship even surpassed Genius. So, in order to prove herself, decided to simulate a real battle with the male lead. However, after only 2.5 exchanges, Genie gave up. So he had to leave the male lead to Taimei. Taimei was going to teach the male lead some basic magic. But the male lead said that he had already learned them from books. Then he demonstrated to Taimei how to rub fireballs with left hand and water ball with right hand. The 2 teachers were speechless. They didn't expect this little kid could cast spells without chanting. You know, it takes 20.5 years of practice to shorten chanting. The 2 teachers were speechless and sweating, and they felt they had nothing to teach the male lead. At this time, the male lead took out a towel from the prop box and handed it to them. This directly shocked the teachers for 100 years. Unexpectedly, the male lead had such a rare skill as a prop box. Seeing that things were going on like this yard would be demolished by the male lead. So, the two teachers had to ask the male lead's father to train outside, because if they teach ultimate magic at home, it might blow up the house. The father was also helpless, although he had expected this day would come, but he didn't expect it would be the first day. The helpless father had to agree. Let the male lead go out to teach, but he must come back before the sun goes down. Soon, the three of them arrived at an open grassland. Taime asked the male lead to try the ultimate magic, but the male lead just gently gathered a small fireball, but it directly blew a crater in the ground. Taime was speechless. Because of this power, completely beyond the scope of ultimate magic. Normally, this attack should have exhausted his magic power and fainted, but the male lead didn't have any abnormal reaction. Just then, two teachers suddenly sensed something. The next second, a killer rabbit rushed out of the grass. Seeing that the two adults were not easy to bully, the killer rabbit turned to the male protagonist. But the killer rabbit never thought that he encountered a cheat at the beginning. Since this was the first time the male lead killed a monster, the male lead put the killer rabbit in the prop box and planned to show it to his parents and sister. Seeing the prop box in the male lead's hand, the manager expressed his envy. He must save money to buy a magic bag. Although the magic bag is not as powerful as the box, it also has the effect of storage, but it's just a bit expensive. Seeing that there were 2.5 hours until dark, the two decided to continue training. So Taime cast the detection magic and sensed 2.5 demons 250 meters away. Seeing this, the male lead was also curious. So the male lead imitated her and instantly sensed 4 killer rabbits 300 meters away. Taime was shocked again by the male lead, but Danny asked Tammy to take it easy. After all, not everyone can be a student with a cheat. Then the three of them easily solved all the killer rabbits. However, the male lead still wanted to continue the pursuit, but Jeannie and Taime stopped the male lead, because in front of that forest, there are many powerful demons inside, and every 2.5 years, the demons inside will flood out and attack the town. That's why the walls are built so strong. Is this dragon a bit stupid? It has wings but doesn't fly. They use their heads to hit the city wall. When he returned home at night, the male protagonist was surprised to find that he only killed 2.5 rabbits. His level has risen to level 8. Then the male protagonist translated the system interface into Japanese. It was given by the god of experience. The experience rate is increased by 100 times. If they were discovered by the country, they would definitely be taken as research subjects. Otherwise, they might even lose their lives. The next day, the two teachers took the male lead to the Adventurers Guild to collect some information about the demons suitable for the male lead's opponent. But before they found the information, the two teachers were targeted by a red-haired Kuan man. And was targeted. Jeannie didn't want to cause trouble and wanted to take the male lead away, but were captured by the man and his minions. Just as the Kuan man was about to kiss, the male protagonist grabbed the Kuan man and then gently hit the Kuan man with a palm knife. The angry Kuan man directly picked up a weapon to teach the male lead a lesson, but he never expected that. This little kid is a cheat. Not only caught by you with 2 fingers, but also easily threw himself out. In the blink of an eye, 2.5 years passed. The contract between the two teachers is about to expire. Before parting with the teacher, the male lead remembered that Jeannie once said he wanted a magic bag. That night, the male protagonist came. He went to the forest. He selected materials suitable for making magic bags. At this time, the soldier saw the forest was on fire, thinking that the monster was invading the town again. So the Lord immediately led people to the demon forest. But when they arrived, they only saw a huge pit, and there were no monsters nearby. Then the Lord saw the towel left on the ground. The Lord immediately understood what had happened. The next day, under the supervision of the two teachers, finished the final training. Seeing that he was about to say goodbye to the two teachers, the male lead took out the magic bag he made by himself to give them. Although the materials used are ogres, and dragon, which are high-level magic hands. But the inside is just an ordinary magic bag. Its capacity, it could barely fit their house, which scared Kini a lot. After all, the magic bag he wanted could only hold a small carriage at most. It's no surprise that this magic bag is definitely a national treasure, but they worried that with their strength, this treasure would be taken away by others sooner or later. The male lead told them not to worry, because he had already set up permissions. Others who get the magic bag must bear the maximum weight, so they didn't have to worry about the magic bag being taken. Finally, when it was time to part, Jeannie and Tammy gave the male lead a goodbye kiss, and the male lead's adventurer career officially began. The next day, the hero's family took a carriage to the capital, because every noble kid here, when they're 10 years old, must attend the debut party among nobles. Just then, the male protagonist detected a battle 2 kilometers away. About a dozen people were besieged by 50 monsters. Knowing the situation, the father sent 2 knights to rescue them, but the male lead felt that the 4-legged horse were too slow, so he jumped off the carriage without hesitation and cast a speed spell on himself at the same time. In just 2.5 seconds, the figure of the male protagonist could no longer be seen. Meanwhile, dozens of demons had surrounded a carriage. The original dozen soldiers had also been killed or wounded. Seeing that the only remaining soldiers were about to be torn apart, the protagonist, who rushed over, decisively chose to act. With just 2.5 moves, the male protagonist killed most of the demons. Then the male lead took out a big sword from the prop box and used the flame sword he had just learned for 2 days, making the lord of the demons evaporate. Then, the male protagonist quickly used a wide-ranging healing magic. He healed the wounded soldier. At this time, the father also rushed here and immediately recognized. The carriage was printed with the Santana Duke's logo. Then a pair of sisters came out of the carriage. Father recognized them. They were the princess and the daughter of the duke. They also recognized their father as the border earl, but they didn't recognize the male lead. Seeing this, the male lead began to introduce himself, but the princess was a little unwell due to fright. He knew this was a good opportunity for him to serve, so he volunteered to cast the optimization magic to calm their emotions. Under the influence of the non-Jewish optimization magic, they not only felt very relaxed, but also the pain and fatigue on their bodies disappeared. However, what the male lead didn't expect was that his optimization magic was surprisingly effective. They both fell in love with the male lead. They both wanted to take him home, but the male lead refused, because he felt that these two were trouble. But it happened that they were also going to the capital for a show, so the two forcibly dragged the male lead away, leaving their father standing there in astonishment. It would take at least 7 days to the capital, so the male lead and others came to a small town to have a rest. The male lead thought he could escape, but they didn't plan to let the male lead go. They insisted on sharing a room with him. At this time, the father reminded them that the male lead is only 10 years old and unmarried. It seemed inappropriate for men and women to share a room, but they didn't care about that. They insisted on sharing a room with him. The male lead could only hope they can find a bigger room. It would be better if the 3 beds could be far apart. But it's just a wishful thinking, because after seeing the room, the man was shocked, because his bed was sandwiched between them. And then it got even better. In order to be closer to the male lead, they actually put the 3 beds together. The male lead was sandwiched between them. He spent a shameful night in embarrassment. After several days, the male lead's eyes have become like panda eyes. It was all thanks to the 2 of them taking turns every night, which made him look so exhausted. But fortunately, they finally arrived at the capital today. The story of the male lead saving people has spread here. To praise the hero's deeds, summoned the male lead. In the hall, the king knighted the male lead as a baron, and also gave him a bounty and a mansion. Being knighted at the age of 10, this move caused dissatisfaction among other nobles. But the king didn't want to waste words with them. He directly told them to get out. Seeing this, the male lead had to reluctantly accept the coronation. After the ceremony, the king privately invited the hero and his father. The king believed that the male lead was a once-in-a-century talent, and he would do whatever it takes to keep him. Meanwhile, the king made a bold decision. That is to marry his princess and the duke's daughter. To marry the male lead. Of course, not now. Let the male lead marry them. But wait until they are adults to hold the wedding. The male lead couldn't believe it. But the king thought the man knew what he was doing. After all, along the way, not only held their hands every day, but also slept in the same bed for 7 consecutive days. Although the male lead thought he was forced, but in the face of the king's tough attitude, he knew he couldn't refuse at all. He was forced to agree to be engaged to them. Hearing the man agreed to marry, which reminded them of that unforgettable night, especially the moment when the 3 of them were close. Hearing the vivid description of the 2, the male lead could only admit defeat. The next day, the male lead went to the church to find the 7 gods, hoping that the gods could lower his ability value. Lower a little. The gods ignored him, and even wanted him to practice, to become a sub-god like a dragon or a mythical beast. And the gods also felt that the world lacks entertainment activities, and hoped that the male lead could use his past life's knowledge to create some entertainment items. For the male protagonist, a human from Earth, is a piece of cake. After returning, the male lead immediately went to a prop store. He asked the boss to make a flip device for him. After hearing the description from the male lead, the boss thought it was very interesting, and he accepted the commission decisively, and the male lead took out a gold coin as the cost of making the sample, which almost scared the boss to death, because it was too much. But the male lead was not short of money, and the extra part was treated as an early investment. The boss gratefully accepted it. When he reached the door, the male lead remembered that he had forgotten his sister. It turned out that he was accompanying his sister, and slipped away. Seeing his angry sister, the male lead immediately became a dog, to coax his sister completely, but the sister still wanted to buy what the male lead, to make up for it. When they got home, the sister took the male lead and watched a 2.5-hour dress-up show. Then the maid came over and told the male lead the prop shop owner had already hurried to make the chessboard, the sample made by the boss. The male lead was very satisfied. Then the male lead demonstrated the gameplay to the boss. The boss thought the game would be a hit, so he suggested that the male lead produce it in large quantities. And the male lead had the same idea, divided into luxury version and ordinary version, to sell to nobles and commoners respectively. Then the male lead instructed the boss to make 50 sets of deluxe version and 1,000 sets of normal version. But the boss was hesitant, because he didn't have so much money. Just as he was calculating how much silver he needed, the male lead directly took out 5 gold coins and slapped them on the table, which almost scared the boss to death, and quickly said he would do his best. After the funding problem was solved, they need to apply for a patent to the gods. As long as they dedicate the product to the god of business, no one else can copy this product within 3 years. Then the 2 put their hands on the chessboard and began to chant the spell. With a flash of golden light, the chessboard disappeared from the table. Meanwhile, the male lead asked the boss to make a super deluxe chessboard first, to give it to the king first. Hearing that he was going to offer it to the royal family, the boss was scared to death again. At the same time, he couldn't help but admire the male lead more. But the male lead thought it was nothing. If he knew that, if the gods knew that he was playing with the flip he made, he would be scared to death. 2.5 days later, the debut ceremony among the nobles officially began. Soon, the male lead followed his parents to the venue. The male lead noticed that when he received the title, the red-robed asshole he met, he brought his 3 little bastards to the debut party. But the male lead ignored them. Instead, he came to his old lover. Seeing the 2 greeting each other, the father-in-law also showed a strange expression, because the last time they met, it was in a private setting. So now, the parents of both sides introduced themselves. A very official self-introduction. Then the male lead looked at his fiancée in a dress, and couldn't stop praising her. His father was really impressed. Only 10 years old, who was better than him at flirting with girls. Then the king and Princess Genie also made an appearance. After the king announced the start of the banquet, the male lead's family came to the king. Seeing Princess Ginny, the male lead couldn't help but praise Ginny again. which made Ginny almost orgasm on the spot. Then the male lead took out the flip and gave it to the king. Although the king was also interested, he was more concerned about his daughter. So he asked the male lead to come and talk to him. The male lead was speechless. Siran, although his father is proud of having such an excellent son, proud of him, he still hoped that his son could be like a child, talk to his peers more. The male lead also felt that he had gone too far. After all, whose kid would be crazy and do business at 10? Then Tai Mei found the male lead. Then they sat on the sofa and showed affection, and their relationship developed rapidly. The male lead asked Tai Mei to call him by his name. Before Tai Mei was happy for 2.5 seconds, 3 little bastards came over to praise Tai Mei, and even imagined Tai Mei throwing herself into his arms. But obviously he was overthinking. Tai Mei just politely returned the compliment. This made the little dude behind them dissatisfied. How dare he be so indifferent to his big brother? He wanted to go out and fight with the male lead on the spot. The male lead was not afraid of him. However, when they came outside, Tai Mei was hugging and kissing the male lead. This made the 3 little bastards even more upset. So the green shirt guy took out his magic book and began to gather magic power from his crotch, and then released a big fireball at the male lead. This made the male lead and Tai Mei speechless, because it was the first time they had seen such a small one. At this time, another little brother was not convinced, also started to gather magic power from his crotch, and was about to release earth magic. But the result was predictable. The salt egg was smaller than the fireball. But at this time, Tai Mei finally couldn't stand it. So he directly interrupted the little guy's spell, and told him the male lead's title, and defeating 30 demons to San Mao. San Mao had heard of the hero's name, and immediately knelt on the ground. After admitting his mistake, he ran away in shame. After San Mao left, Tai Mei knew that the male lead was trying to show off. So she threatened the male lead to have a date with her, or she would tell Ginny about it. Just then Ginny also ran over. Seeing that Tai Mei was about to speak, the male lead quickly covered her mouth, which scared Ginny a lot. So she was going to tell Tai Mei's father about it. Hearing this, the male lead quickly let go of her hand. Tai Mei directly boasted about the man promised her a date. Ginny was instantly jealous. She covered her face and expressed her envy. In order not to disappoint his 2 fiancés, the male lead invited Ginny and Tai Mei to go out on a date. But unexpectedly, the king overheard this. The next day, the male lead came to the mansion rewarded by the king, because it hadn't been lived in for a long time. The house was in a dilapidated state. Every touch was covered with 2.5 dust. But this was nothing for the male lead. He cast a large-scale cleaning spell. The house was instantly refreshed. Even the bed for the night was fixed. Soon, the maid and butler arranged by his father arrived. Although this butler named Conan sounds a little unreliable, but the male lead accepted him because he didn't wear a watch. He still accepted him. Then the maid assigned cleaning tasks to everyone, but the male lead had already cleaned it with magic. There wasn't even a speck of dust in the room. The maid wasn't surprised at all. After all, she had watched him grow up. Then the hero's family also came to visit. After seeing all the rooms, Dad always felt like something was missing. The male lead also understood. He immediately took out the red dragon specimen to enhance his image. Not only the maid, but also his father was almost scared to death, thinking that the male lead stole it from a museum. The male lead quickly explained. He had defeated it in the forest. He accidentally defeated in the forest. After hearing this, Dad was even more surprised. After all, it was a monster of disaster level. Even the top adventure group's troops might not be able to handle it. But thinking that the male lead has 7 gods, Dad was soon relieved, hearing that the red dragon was worth 1,000 white gold coins. The male protagonist was shocked himself. He didn't expect it to be worth 100 billion yen. Then his mother suddenly exclaimed. They came to find that mother was staring at the toilet. It turned out that the male lead used magic to create a smart toilet. This made the elder sister and mother, who used the smart toilet for the first time, very happy. Dad thought it was just a toilet and was so surprised. But after he used it, He immediately asked the male lead to install one for the whole family. After all, for his father with hemorrhoids, it was simply a miracle. Then the father told the man, according to the convention, nobles who own a mansion must hold a grand entrance ceremony to invite other nobles to visit their homes. The male lead was really convinced. Why do they always do these useless things? But he still followed his father's advice, asked the butler to make some invitations to invite the nobles. The male lead wanted to invite the king, but the butler said that only the nobility above the count can entertain them, so the male lead had to give up. Then the male lead made some glass wine glasses, because people in this world only have pottery tableware. So the male lead decided to use them as souvenirs, as gifts for guests. Then there are the drinks and dishes for the reception. The dish was a hamburger steak. The maid took a bite and thought it was very good. The drink was sparkling wine. The maid had never drunk such a great wine before, and was directly conquered by the dense bubbles. She accidentally drank 3 bottles in a row. The male lead was speechless. Without him saying, the male lead knew how delicious the wine was. At this time, the butler told the male lead the king wanted to see him. The king was looking for him because of the debut party, because all the nobles received invitations, except the father-in-law who didn't receive it. Fortunately, the male lead had already guessed the king's thoughts. So, he asked the butler to prepare the invitation letter in advance and handed it to the king himself. Seeing this, the king was also very happy. Hearing that the king was coming to visit, the maids were scared and shouted, "Awesome!" Only then did the male lead tell everyone he was awesome. It was because the princess of the kingdom was his fiancée. Hearing this, the maids were scared and shouted, "Awesome!" 2.5 days later, the debut party officially began. Mei Tai and her father also attended the party. Although Tai Mei's father knew that the male lead was awesome, but when he saw the red dragon specimen, he was still frightened. Seeing that most people had arrived, the male lead replaced wine with water. He toasted everyone. As expected, everyone who drank the sparkling wine for the first time, they were very happy, and they had never seen such beautiful cups. They had never seen such a beautiful cup before. Hearing that they could take some back, the father-in-law was also very happy, and the dishes prepared by the male lead were also very good. With just a few hamburger patties, he conquered his sister and wife again. At this time, the king also came with Princess Gimi. Seeing the king's arrival, the nobles were shocked. They didn't expect the male lead to be so awesome. He made an exception to invite the king to his small nobles banquet. And the king, as expected, went through the process. He was conquered by the non-Jewish wine and food. Jimmy was also very satisfied with her future husbands. Satisfied, the queen who had finished using the toilet found the host and asked the man to install the same toilet in the palace. The king was also curious after hearing that. After the king experienced the local cleaning, the king was very angry. The king was angry that the man didn't tell him about it. He ordered the man to install this toilet for his whole family immediately. Then, he praised the man in front of all the nobles. At this time, the late red-robed old Dick finally arrived. Relying on his higher title than the male lead, he opened his mouth and said a bunch of rubbish. He mocked that the house was as small as a doghouse. However, as soon as he entered the door, the old Dick was scared by the red dragon placed at the door. He was scared. After being given a slap in the face, he still refused to repent. He not only mocked the host's poor taste, but also the guests invited were all low-class nobles. Sure enough, flies are hated wherever they go. Then, after tasting the sparkling wine, he was shocked in his heart. He said it was bad. The same was true for the hamburger steak. Although the male lead wanted to kill this asshole on the spot, but the male lead suddenly had a better idea. So he asked the butler to bring a souvenir. Sure enough, the old man took advantage of the situation. Seeing such exquisite wine glasses, he directly asked the male lead to bring him another 50. The male lead refused, because he sensed the king was approaching. So he told the old man he actually prepared a better gift for him. Hearing this, the old man became even more excited. But what he never expected was that the great gift that the old man said was the king. The old man was scared and immediately backed down. After being scolded by the king, The old man hurriedly left the man's house on his knees. Then Tai Mei came over. Because she saw that the male lead deliberately designed to trick the old man. She couldn't help but sigh that her husband was so naughty. However, all this was heard clearly by the father-in-law, although he wanted to quibble, but he couldn't help laughing halfway through. He couldn't help laughing. In this way, the male protagonist was taught a lesson for 2.5 hours. The next day, the male lead found the deputy leader of the knights, Jing. The king also wanted to make some monster specimens. So he asked the male lead to find some monster corpses. Then the deputy leader found a random warehouse. But the male lead thought it was too small. The deputy leader was suddenly shocked. He thought the male lead brought his red dragon home. The male lead said it wasn't necessary, although it wasn't as big as the red dragon. But there were a lot of them. So the deputy leader had to ask the male lead to put the monsters on the training ground first. However, when the male lead took out all the monsters, the deputy leader was completely dumbfounded. Unexpectedly, besides the Dilong, there were a lot of other more powerful demons. Looking at the corpses of these monsters piled up like hills, the deputy leader couldn't help but suspect that if the male lead was the apostle of God, the male lead was also shocked. So he had to make up a random excuse, and he wanted to leave. But the deputy leader grabbed him and asked him to train with the knights. The male lead had no choice but to agree. When they arrived at the training ground, the deputy leader first introduced him to the knights. The knight heard that he was going to fight a child. The knight was a little reluctant, so the deputy leader did something bad and asked him to be the first to practice with the male lead. Out of chivalry, the knight decided to let the male lead attack first. However, the male lead just cast a strengthening spell and flashed to kill the knight. Seeing how powerful the male lead was, the deputy leader sent the entire knight group and the male lead's team. However, when they were about to besiege the male lead, the leader fell from the sky to stop them. The unaware leader thought the male lead was lost and came here. So he hugged the male lead and comforted him. The deputy leader, who was scolded, was speechless. He directly told him the identity of the male lead. Hearing that the male lead was the awesome kid who alone killed 30 half-orcs, the leader immediately became excited. He immediately wanted to have a simulation battle with him. The male lead was speechless. How could the mock battle suddenly turn into a duel? Seeing the captain, who was a swordsman, was going to bully a child, the knights also consciously stepped back to make way. Before the male lead could react, the leader directly attacked the male lead. The leader, seeing that the male lead could fight evenly with the leader, everyone showed an unbelievable expression. But what they didn't expect was that their leader was defeated by a child. However, the defeated leader was not unhappy. Instead, she excitedly decided to marry him. To marry the male lead. This scared the male lead a lot. No matter how you look at it, there seems to be a big age gap between them. The leader said that age was not a problem, because the average lifespan of their elves is 300 years. So they will always look young after reaching adulthood. Even if the male lead grows up, there won't be any changes. Hearing this, the male protagonist panicked and said he couldn't decide such a lifelong event alone. He needs to discuss it with others. The leader also thought the male lead was right, so he decided to let the king decide their marriage. The male lead was almost scared to death, but before he could react, he was directly pulled away by the deputy leader. Jieja, the leader told the king about their marriage. The king and the father were also frightened. The male lead had to tell them. To the two, the father was helpless. Then he told the male lead. The leader's identity is not simple. Although elves belong to this country, but politically it is almost independent. And the leader is the princess of the Elven Kingdom. In other words, the male lead was proposed by another princess. Although the king had no objection, he still told the leader. The male lead has already made a marriage contract. And the duke's daughter. It means that the male lead is a talent recognized by both the king and the duke. Now the leader was even more excited and wanted to marry the male lead on the spot. The king and father could only reluctantly agree. The leader needs to get his father's permission first. So he took the male lead to write a letter. After they left, the king couldn't help but doubt the identity of the male lead. After all, He could defeat the leader at the age of 10, the top combat power in this country. The deputy leader also told the king. To the king, the military advisor suggested to use the legendary D-level magic book to test the male lead. The next day, the exhausted male lead, he just got rid of the duel appointment with the captain. The next second, he was pulled by the deputy leader to the king. Seeing so many people, Nanju thought he had made some mistake again, but the king only gave him a magic book and said it was written by the first king. The male lead was also very excited, because what he had been exposed to, only super magic at most. He had never seen the legendary D-level magic before. Seeing that the male lead could understand it, the king also understood something. They couldn't understand the words on the book. The male lead realized. He didn't expect that the book was written in Japanese. It's no wonder that the king and others couldn't understand the words. The male lead realized that the first king should be a time traveler like himself. So under the king's questioning, the male lead had to admit that he was a reincarnator, and said that he was the same as the first king. They were both from a country called Japan. This was undoubtedly a bombshell for the others. Even his father couldn't help but suspect whether the male lead was his biological son. The male lead said that there was no doubt about it, because when he was baptized at the age of 5, the god said the same thing. This almost scared the king and others to death. This made them even more curious. What kind of abilities the male lead had? The helpless male lead had to open the panel for them. Unexpectedly, the hero's stats are super awesome. Besides plus, he also has the title of God's messenger. Now, not only the king, the whole world must kneel down to the male lead. But this kind of life admired by thousands of people is not what he wants. Because his biggest dream is to become an adventurer. So he hoped they could help him keep this secret. The king agreed to the male lead and made an astonishing decision. But before the male lead could answer, the leader rushed in with his father's consent letter and directly took the male lead out on a date. And when the two queens learned that the male lead and the leader, they were also furious. While the male lead was still apologizing, the leader rushed in and pulled the male lead to go to the forest for a tryst. The next day, the male lead was in the library. He was flipping through the D-level magic book left by the first king. At this time, the two wives suddenly appeared and insisted on having a sweet date with him. Hearing the two women's jealous words, the male lead finally couldn't stand it. He used the excuse of having something to do today. But as soon as he went out, the leader came to him again and wanted to take him outside the capital for a mock battle. The male lead refused firmly, because he really had something to do today. Then he changed into an adventurer's outfit, and then went to the Adventurers Guild. It turned out that he was 12 years old today. He could officially register as an adventurer. When filling out the form, because he wanted to keep a low profile, he didn't write down his title of Baron on the form. Then after registering his magic power, he officially became an adventurer. Although he needs to start from the lowest level, the male lead was very happy. Just as he was thanking the big sister at the front desk, a little punk with 2 minions suddenly came over to tease the big sister. Seeing such a cliché routine, the male lead was really convinced. Why does he always encounter such a cliché plot? And the little punk didn't even bother to act. He kicked the male lead directly. The male lead dodged with a flash, because he didn't want to get into trouble. But the 2 younger brothers behind him didn't plan to let him go, and even wanted to draw their swords to teach him a lesson. Just then, a red-haired man appeared and interrupted them. Because the red-haired man was famous in the Adventurers Guild, the little guy knew he couldn't afford to offend him. So he immediately took his minions and fled. The male lead also thanked him. The red-haired man saw that the male lead had good strength, so he decided to have a drink with him to be friends. Of course, the male lead drank juice. The reason why the little punk was so afraid of him, because the red-haired man was an extreme adventurer. Seeing his shiny business card, the male lead was extremely envious. But Hongmao told him that it was nothing, because there are S-class and SS class above him, and even a 3S level black card. Just then, Hongmao's wife suddenly came over. Seeing that Hongmao had the leisure to drink, his wife hit him with a stick, and then dragged Hongmao out to do the mission. The male lead was speechless. After saying goodbye to Hongmao, the male lead also decided to take a mission to practice. But due to the level restriction, the tasks that the male lead can take, only the task of hunting goblins, but the male lead was still very happy. However, as soon as he took the task and walked out the door, the leader suddenly pulled him into his arms. It turned out that their night group was planning to go outside the capital for training, but unexpectedly they met the male lead here. After learning that the male lead planned to hunt goblins outside, the leader decisively gave the training task to the deputy leader, and then grabbed the male lead who was about to run away, and went to kill monsters together. Soon, the leader led the male protagonist to the forest. Then, through the reconnaissance magic, he quickly found the location of the goblins. However, when they arrived, they found the goblins were about to harm a farmer. The two immediately flashed forward to drive them away. Then the male protagonist cast a healing spell for the farmer, while the leader directly drew his sword, easily killing all the goblins. But at this moment, more goblins rushed out. The male protagonist immediately cast a strengthening spell and shot the leader, which directly gave the leader a full stack of love buff. Before the stunned goblins could react, the leader directly went crazy with the husband buff. Just then, a group of lizard monsters rushed out again. So the male lead asked the leader to retreat with the farmers first. Next, he just needed to deal with these lizard monsters. However, the male lead just slightly intervened, almost blowing up the entire forest. This matter, two familiar adventurers came over. Seeing the crater on the ground, they also suddenly had a sense of déjà vu. Of course, the male protagonist didn't know about it. When he returned to the guild, the male protagonist told the big sister. He told the big sister about the lizard monster's lair. The big sister was also shocked after hearing it. Then she quickly reported it to the foreman. So the leader invited the male protagonist to the reception room, because he suspected that the male lead had hired a coach. After all, he just registered as a guild adventurer today. How could he defeat a C-class adventurer? To defeat the lizard monster, although the big sister tried her best to defend him, but the foreman said that ordinary people like the male protagonist who cheated for pay, he has seen too many, so he decided to deprive the male lead of his ID card and directly expelled him from the guild. Just then, the guild president walked in. The foreman quickly blamed the male lead, but the president ignored him because he already knew the identity of the male lead. Just then, the leader walked in. Seeing the male lead was there, the leader hugged the male lead and started to kiss him. When he heard that they were engaged, the foreman and the older sister were shocked. But what surprised him even more was yet to come. When he learned of the heroism of the male lead and his father and the Earl of Border, the foreman's courage was scared away. But that's not all, because the leader is the president's sister. So disrespecting the male lead is disrespecting his sister-in-law, which is disrespectful to his superior. The foreman didn't expect the male lead to be so awesome. He quickly knelt down and apologized. Seeing his sincerity, he generously forgave him. Meanwhile, because the male lead completed a C-level task, and he could defeat Hong Long alone at the age of 10, and the male lead was his sister's husband, so the president decided to make an exception, to directly promote the male lead to level 1. The foreman and the big sister also agreed, so they immediately went out to help him with the formalities. After they left, the president also apologized for his subordinate's rudeness, apologized to the male lead. Originally, when he heard that his sister was going to marry a child, he was a little worried. But after seeing the male lead in person today, he was relieved, entrusting his sister's life to the male lead. Meanwhile, the 7 gods were also watching the male lead in heaven. The gods saw that the male lead caused trouble again. They also thought they had made the male lead too powerful. But the creator god felt it wasn't enough. He should be even more awesome. Because the seal of the demon lord is about to be lifted, the gods were also shocked. After realizing the seriousness of the matter, they decided to find a teacher for the male lead, to quickly improve the male lead's strength. Soon, it was the day when the male lead started school. But the maid forgot about it. If he was late because of her negligence, he would blame himself for the rest of his life. However, while the maid was blaming herself, the male lead reassured her. Then the male lead ran to the corner of the gate. He used teleportation magic to teleport to the school. Although the male lead made it to the exam in time, he didn't realize that he had been teleported to the examination site of civilians. When he arrived at the examination room, other students looked worried when they saw the questions, but only the male lead looked relaxed. Of course, it was all thanks to his past life memories. These questions for primary school students were a piece of cake for him. In just 2.5 minutes, the male lead finished answering all the questions and then lay down on the table to sleep. The invigilator passing by thought the male lead wanted to hand in a blank paper, but the male lead told him that he had finished. The teacher could only say awesome. After the competition, the magic exam followed. The method is very simple, because this training ground has a defense barrier. The candidates just need to use their strongest magic on the target. Then the first candidate began to chant the spell, and then a fireball hit the target. Then the second candidate started. Seeing their power was worse than fart. Only then did the male lead realize the gap between him and his peers. If he used his strongest magic, he might destroy the school directly. Soon it was the male lead's turn to take the test. The male lead wanted to use the most basic fireball spell to deal with it, but the examiner looked at the fireball in the male lead's hand. He felt something was wrong. Before he could speak, the male lead cast a fireball spell, which directly penetrated the entire training ground. The male lead was really convinced. He didn't expect that the so-called defense barrier was so fragile. The examiner was also confused, because he had never seen such a powerful fireball technique. But compared to these, what matters more is to confirm whether anyone was injured outside the wall. Meanwhile, the examiner asked everyone to take the archery test. The archery test is also very simple. Just fight against these adventurers and let them give a review. The male lead saw the red-haired man he met recently among them. The red-haired man also saw the male lead, so he offered to be the male lead's opponent. The male lead wanted to refuse the red-haired man, but the examiner directly agreed for the male lead. The male lead was helpless, but still raised his bow to prepare for the exam. Seeing this, the red-haired man told the male lead to use all his strength. The male lead thought that since the red-haired was an advanced adventurer, he must have some strength. So he strengthened his body and charged towards the red-haired man. After feeling the power of the male lead, Hong Mao also became interested. But this made other candidates miserable, because they couldn't see the movements clearly. Seeing that the male lead could fight evenly with him, Hong Mao also decisively enhanced his body. However, when the two were fighting fiercely, the examiner stopped them. If they continued this level of simulation battle, it would make other candidates fear of the exam. Seeing this, the male lead could only bow his head and apologize. In order not to be disrupted by the two in the next exam, the examiner had to let the male lead go home and wait. The next day, the king found the male lead, because the noise made by the male lead in the exam had reached him. The male lead quickly began to explain. He said he only used the most basic magic. If he used super or D-level magic, the school would have been destroyed by now. Hearing that the male lead had learned even D-level magic, the king was a little unconvinced. So the male lead wanted to demonstrate it on the spot. The king and others were almost scared to death, so they quickly stopped him. But compared to these, the king was more concerned about how the male lead appeared in the exam. It turned out that the academy had a south gate and a north gate, commoners in the south, and nobles in the north. That is to say, the male lead went to the wrong door, and his two wives didn't see him in the examination room, so they are still angry, and his father-in-law is not much better. It was the dean who reported this to him. A commoner not only got full marks, but also destroyed the training ground, and even fought evenly with senior adventurers. So now he doesn't know how to score. Duke Wenyan immediately laughed out loud, because only the male protagonist must be the male lead. So he asked the dean to report the truth. But compared to these, he was more looking forward to the Prime Minister's expression when he saw the repair bill. The Prime Minister was also very troubled, but he had to pay for the repair cost. After all, the king was his father-in-law. The helpless king had to ask the male lead to restrain himself. Soon it was time to announce the results. The male lead got the first place in the school as expected, and the male lead's sister, Lainey, also studied in this school. Seeing the arrival of the male lead, she was very happy. After all, he hadn't seen his brother for 2.5 months. She hadn't seen her brother. She also told the male lead, as the top student of the school, he would give a speech at the entrance ceremony. Soon the time came. On the day of the entrance ceremony, Jeannie and Tammy saw the male lead in uniform. They were immediately fascinated by him. However, his intimate behavior with the two princesses were despised by all the male students. But the girls were different, and praised the male lead sitting in the middle as handsome. The dean announced that the ceremony officially began. However, after the male lead's random speech, the king suddenly walked onto the podium. Because the male lead was really amazing, he was afraid that the male lead would make trouble again. So he came here to say hello to everyone, and wanted everyone to be more lenient. The male lead was speechless. Only those who knew the male lead were laughing their heads off. Before the class started, the teacher asked the students to choose their favorite subjects. To shut up his two wives, he chose the noble class. Then he chose magic props and other adventure-related subjects. Jeannie chose the internal affairs department. Of course, this is all to manage the territory with the male lead in the future. Taime chose the business class, to help the male lead do business and make money. The male lead was also very happy, because with the help of these two virtuous wives, he can go out to adventure with peace of mind. After leaving the classroom, the male lead saw the three bullies seemed to be bullying other students. He took a closer look. It was his cat, Earnyang, that he hid outside, and his mistress. So the male lead decisively stepped forward to stop them. Seeing this, they didn't understand why the male lead helped the lowly civilians, and they even threatened to let their father destroy his home. At this time, Jeannie and Tammy came over. The three saw this and immediately became cowardly. After all, they were competing with their dads. They couldn't compete with them. The three immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. The princess ignored them, so she asked the three to apologize to the girl. Then the cat-eared girl quickly thanked the male lead. But the two wives saw that the two had such a good relationship, so they decided to have a good chat with the cat-eared girl. Of course, the male lead had to kneel aside and listen. But what the male lead didn't expect was that the three of them could talk very well. Suddenly, a burst of laughter came to the male lead's ears and told him to come to the library quickly. But when the male lead opened the library door, what he saw was actually a house. Then the male lead was teleported into the house by magic, and the man who appeared in front of him is the master arranged by the 7 gods. And this master is actually a transmigrator. It was he who defeated and sealed the evil god 300 years ago. But now, he has become a god in another world. Now he is like other gods. He can't interfere in human affairs. So the task of saving the world can only be handed over to him. And all this is also related to the male lead's past life. Before the male lead could ask, the master directly teleported him to the sea, and then threw him a sword, and told him that after he completed the training task, he would tell him the truth. The male lead's task is to cross this forest and return to his mansion, because the strength of the male lead is only a low-level horse in his world. He must raise his level to above 600 to have a chance to defeat the evil god Yalong, although it will take a lot of time to complete. But the master reassured him, because the flow of time in the two worlds is different. A year here is only equivalent to 1 day in the male lead's world. After giving the task, the master teleported back directly. The male lead was helpless, but he could only bite the bullet and rush into the forest, and started fighting monsters to level up. The monsters in the forest are not ordinary. Only 2.5 minutes after rushing in, he was attacked by 20.5 monsters. Although the process was painful, the male lead would not give up so easily. He raised his sword again and charged towards the monster. In another world, Jeannie and Tamei, who hadn't seen the male lead for a day, went to the hero's house. Hearing that the male lead hadn't come back since yesterday, Taime thought something had happened to him. But Gina reassured Tamei. After all, their husband is the most powerful existence in this world. So she decided to go into the hero's house. waiting for him to come back. On the male lead's side, after 2.5 years of continuous fighting, he has used up half of his magic power. Just as the male lead was about to give up in despair, he suddenly seemed to hear a trace of a cry for help. The male lead stood up subconsciously and walked in the direction of the sound. When he arrived, he saw a wounded little wolf. Seeing his serious injury, the male lead raised his sword, ready to free him from the pain. The next second, the male protagonist suddenly woke up. Because of the constant fighting in the past 2.5 years, he had lost his original kindness. But luckily, he remembered his original intention. He was to protect others. He picked up the wolf and started to treat it. Although his magic power was almost exhausted, he still forcibly exhausted all his magic power to heal the wolf's injuries, and then passed out. And the wolf was saved by the male lead, has been guarding beside the male lead. When the male protagonist woke up, he was very moved by the wolf's actions. So he decided to adopt the wolf as a pet, and named it Xiaobai. In the following time, he ate and slept with Xiaobai at night, and fought monsters and traveled with Xiaobai during the day. Soon 2.5 years passed. The male protagonist finally returned to his master's mansion, and his appearance was no longer that of a child, and his master immediately recognized. The wolf god Fenrir was following the male lead. The male lead didn't expect that. Xiaobai was such a powerful beast. Then, under the guidance of his master, the male lead successfully made a contract with Xiaobai, so that the male protagonist can summon and recall him. But the male lead's training is not over yet. Next, his practice task is to defeat this strong man named Doran. Although the male lead's strength is much stronger than before, but he was still not enough in front of Doran. With just one punch, Duolon knocked the male lead unconscious with a punch. When he woke up again, Nanju had been taken back home by Duolon. At this time, the male lead found a Rilakkuma under the stairs. Just as he was about to say hello, he was pushed to the ground by the jealous Xiaobai. Doran's wife Luli asked them to stop fighting and ready to eat. Looking at the table full of hot meals, the male lead just took a bite and was moved to tears. After all, he had spent 5 years in the wild for survival. He hadn't eaten such delicious food for a long time. Meanwhile, the two wives who had been waiting for 2.5 days to make the male lead happy when he comes back, under the guidance of the maid, were making the hero's favorite cookies. In another world, the male lead has been training with Doran for 2.5 months. Now he can barely catch Doran's moves. Doran was also very pleased about it. After all, when they started training, the male lead couldn't even walk home by himself. Soon 2.5 years passed again. The male lead finally defeated him in a fight. Seeing this, happily announced that the male lead's training was over. The master also fulfilled his promise, told him about his origin and the evil god. Originally, there were 8 gods in this world, and the world where the male protagonist lived, there was no entertainment activity, was because the game god was missing, and he was the evil god they called Amon. Because of his playfulness, he used the divine realm to let innocent people play a death game, so he was expelled from the gods as a demon god. The master was summoned to seal the evil god. That the gods summoned him. The master was summoned to seal the evil god. In the battle against the evil god 300 years ago, they joined forces. Although they successfully sealed the evil god, the male lead's parents also died in the battle. After learning of their parents' deaths, the male protagonist realized that his parents did not abandon him, but came to this world. The master also told the male lead his parents had always been worried about him. Even when they were fighting against the evil god Aaron, they were still looking for a way back to their world. Hearing this, the male lead couldn't hold back anymore. He knelt in front of their graves and cried bitterly, and vowed to defeat that damn evil god, to avenge his parents. After expressing his gratitude to the master, the male lead was ready to return to his own world. At this time, the master stopped him. The male lead had changed from a cute boy to a greasy uncle, so he waved his hand and cast a spell, and turned the male lead back into a child. Just then, Doran suddenly appeared, gave her divine beast to the male lead. However, just after the male lead thanked them, and was about to leave, the master threw him a sword. and asked him to give it to the current king. Soon the male lead returned home. Seeing this, tears almost fell, and his two wives were also very excited. Seeing that they were so worried about him, the male lead quickly apologized to them. Then the two wives quickly took out the cookies they made for him. Now it was the hero who was moved. While shedding 2.5 tears, he ate the burnt cookies with big mouthfuls. The next day, the male lead told them he had trained in the other world for 2 years, and his master was the first king of this country. They were a little incredulous. Then the male lead took out the token his master gave him, seeing that it was the knife used by the first king. Only then did the king believe that the man was not lying. However, compared to these, the duke told the male lead his adventurer qualification would be revoked. Now the male lead was not calm. It turned out that because the hero didn't complete the promotion commission, so the guild sent a message to remind the male lead. Fortunately, the president is his brother-in-law, so he successfully accepted the task of hunting down thieves. Then the male lead used teleportation to arrive at the forest. Seeing no one around, he directly turned on the flight mode. He quickly found a gang of thieves who were robbing with knives. He decisively chose to help. However, what he didn't expect was that the person being robbed were actually his 2 teachers in his childhood. Seeing that Genie was injured, the male lead quickly cast a healing spell for him. Seeing that the male lead was just a little kid, they mocked him, telling the male lead to go home and drink milk. Now the male protagonist couldn't bear it. He directly rushed up with his sword to fight them, but the result was predictable. These little punks were no match for the OP male lead. However, because the task required them to be captured alive, so the male lead didn't use his full strength. He just knocked them out. After the 2 teachers learned that the male lead was here, they were also frightened. After all, this is a C-level adventurer that only C-class adventurers can accept. At this time, the male lead took out his gold card. The 2 teachers were even more surprised. They didn't expect that the OP guy was only 12 years old. He had become an A-class adventurer. But considering that the male lead grew up with a cheat, the 2 teachers were not surprised anymore. Then the male lead dragged the thief back to the city by carriage. Then the male lead stopped in front of the prop store, because the merchant that the male lead saved was the father of Paloma. When Paloma thanked the male lead, accidentally revealed the male lead's barren identity, the 2 teachers were shocked again. They immediately changed their address to adults. But the male lead asked them not to mind, just call him as usual. Seeing that the male lead was so approachable, Genie couldn't help but praise him for being more mature, and immediately gave him a loving hug, which scared the male lead back dozens of meters. If his wives found out, it would be terrible. So the male lead quickly dragged the carriage away, and the 2 teachers followed him. After arriving at the Adventurers Guild, the man handed the quest certificate to the big sister. The big sister couldn't help but admire him. He completed the task in only 2.5 hours. At this time, the 2 teachers waiting nearby were suddenly molested by hooligans. On closer inspection, it turned out to be the red-haired Kuan and his little brother. Just as the red-haired Kuan was about to fight, the male protagonist took action. Seeing the awesome face of the male lead, the once arrogant Kuan man immediately became cowardly. Just then, Hongmao also came over. The male lead hurried forward to greet him. However, what he didn't expect was that Hongmao was actually Genie's older brother. Seeing someone he knew someone he knew, Hongmao couldn't help but sigh that the world is so small. So he suggested a drink to celebrate. Of course, the male lead drank juice. After 3 rounds of drinking, the 2 teachers took out the designer bags made by the male lead and started to show off. And Hongmao's wife, after learning that the bag made by the male lead could fit a mansion, so she took advantage of her drunkenness to act coquettishly. The helpless male lead had to agree to make one for her. Excited, she wanted to kiss the male lead, but he fell asleep directly. At this time, the male lead remembered that he had school tomorrow and prepared to leave. Seeing that the male lead was so awesome, he still had to go to school. Hongmao guessed that the male lead must be out of touch, so he wanted to do something for him. When the male lead took the magic class the next day, the male lead planned to show off his skills. but the teacher directly defeated him because his magic was too powerful. The school's defense enchantment couldn't even withstand his Kuji magic. 同时, the teacher also told him not to worry about credits because the dean ordered to give him a full score. Seeing the male lead being isolated, they confirmed their guess, so they decided to help the male lead. During the adventure class, they found out that they were the teachers of the class. However, their purpose was not to teach, but to let the students know how awesome the male lead is and make him popular among the classmates. Then, Hongmao asked the students to take out their cards. He wanted the male lead to take out his gold card to show off in front of his classmates, but the male lead almost cried. After all, his classmates had just joined the Adventurers Guild. He took out his gold card at this time. They would be scared to death. So the male lead had to lie that he forgot it. Hongmao had to give up. Then they decided to escalate their actions. So in the next practical class, Hongmao deliberately placed the male lead at the back, because their plan is to show their strength to other students first, and then let the male lead show off at the end. In this way, others will be intimidated by the male lead's strength, making him the hero of the class. Then, after Hongmao defeated all the classmates, it was finally the male lead's turn. However, just as the male lead was eager to try, the bell for class dismissal suddenly rang, and the battle that the male lead expected was forced to end. And such opportunities will never happen again, because the school's funds were used to repair the outer wall damaged by the male lead. So there is no budget now to invite adventurers to give lectures. The male lead was about to cry, but the red-haired guy, the culprit, didn't care. So at night, the male lead took out his anger on the red-haired girl, on the monster. The SS-class dragon appeared for less than 2.5 seconds, was directly killed by the male lead. The magic that the male protagonist cast during venting, which directly caused a huge commotion. The guard thought the evil god had been resurrected. So, his father quickly rushed over with the soldiers. However, when they arrived, they only saw a big hole on the ground. Who did it? The father of the male protagonist suddenly noticed his handkerchief and immediately knew who had done it. The next day, the resurrection of the evil god reached the king. So he asked the protagonist, who was the messenger of God, if he had received a revelation from the gods. The male lead didn't know how to explain it. He couldn't admit that he was the one who did it. The king also saw that the male lead was hiding something. So under his questioning, he had to admit he had destroyed the forest. However, what they didn't know was that, thanks to the disturbance of the male lead, the seal of the evil god had loosened, and some of his body was resurrected. The next day, the male lead came to school as usual. Hearing the teacher say that today is magic class, the self-aware male lead was about to leave, but the teacher stopped him, because today's class is a summoning class, so the male lead could also participate. Moreover, the school specially invited a court magician. Then the teacher took out the magic circle and let the students start calling. Under the teacher's guidance, the students all successfully summoned cute but useless little monsters. However, when it was the male lead's turn to summon, a powerful energy burst out from the magic circle. Seeing this, the teacher felt something was wrong and was about to stop the male lead. The male lead had already completed the summoning. What appeared in front of him was not an ordinary monster, but the demon lord of the demon world. Just as the demon king was confused why he was summoned by a little kid, hearing that he was the demon king, he quickly used flash magic to blind everyone. At this time, the demon lord used the identification skill, and then walked towards him with a fierce face. Seeing this, the male protagonist immediately drew his sword, but the demon lord directly knelt down to the male lead, begging the male lead not to kill him, and said that he was willing to sign a summoning contract with him. And as long as the male lead was willing, even if he wanted to destroy this country, he would do his best to execute it. The male lead was speechless. Although he didn't have the idea of destroying the country, he still signed a contract with the demon lord. Then after the devil left, the teacher stopped the male lead, because he seemed to have seen the male lead had summoned someone, and the other party seemed to claim to be the devil. Hearing this, the male lead quickly defended himself, saying that the other was just a small minion of the demons. and he didn't sign a contract with him. Hearing what the male lead said, the teacher could only choose to believe him. However, just as the male lead was glad to get away with it, the king directly approached the male lead. Then, under the king's questioning, the male lead had no choice but to admit that he summoned the devil, which scared the king and others. It's not over yet. Hearing that the male lead had signed a contract with the devil, the king and his men were scared to death. After all, the other party was the devil. In case the devil got angry on the spot, it would be easy to destroy the entire royal capital. The male lead could only keep apologizing, because he didn't expect to summon such a guy. Speaking of this, the teacher couldn't help but wonder how much magic power the male lead used to summon such a powerful guy. The king was also curious about it. After the male protagonist practiced with the first king, how powerful his abilities have become. So the king asked the teacher to keep the next thing he saw a secret. Then the male lead opened his attribute panel. Seeing that the male lead had obtained the title of sub-god, the king and others were almost scared to death. The teacher also quickly knelt down, calling him awesome. After all, with the current strength of the male lead, not to mention destroying a country, even destroying the world is not a problem. The male lead was really convinced they should treat him as usual. Then the king said he would hold a night meeting, promote the male lead to a viscount, and let the male lead choose a town near the capital, to choose any town as his territory. He also planned to announce the engagement of the male lead. Of course, the male lead has the right to refuse marriage. Before the male lead could say yes, the king turned around and left directly. When he returned home, the maid excitedly congratulated the male lead on his promotion. But at this time, the butler told the hero a bad news. It seems that in the forest where the male lead's hometown is, there seemed to be signs of a monster outbreak. Hearing this, the male lead hurried to his brother's mansion, also told the man the actual situation. Although there have been many vicious monsters on the edge of the forest, he still couldn't confirm whether it was going to happen. The flood recorded in history, so he entrusted the investigation to the Adventurers Guild. After all, he was also afraid of this. If it's just a false alarm, their family's reputation would be ruined. Then, the male protagonist flashed to the Adventurers Guild to inquire. The receptionist told the male lead that the situation was not optimistic, because the signs of the flood seemed to be getting stronger. Many ordinary adventurers haven't even entered the forest, have already been injured and returned. At this time, two of the male lead's teachers stopped him. They were also notified by the guild to reinforce here. After learning that, more adventurers were sent here. The male lead teleported directly into the forest. Then the male lead summoned two divine beasts and began to explore the depths of the forest. But along the way, he always felt like he was being watched. He thought it was the surrounding monsters staring at him, but after killing them all, the feeling didn't disappear. So the male lead directly summoned the demon lord. The suddenly summoned demon lord was about to lose his temper, but when it saw the protagonist's face, the demon lord instantly became soft. After learning the purpose of the summoning, the demon lord also felt a powerful aura, and countless high-level monsters wandering around. But the male lead still wanted more detailed information. So, the demon lord summoned another subordinate who was good at scouting, and the old man really lived up to his reputation. Just after being summoned, he sensed the powerful male protagonist. Hearing that, the future god who would conquer the world, the old man quickly knelt down, saying it was awesome. Then the old man began to use his ability to scout the forest. In a moment, all the monsters in the forest emerged to see. Seeing so many high-level monsters, the male lead with the divine beast, he solved all the monsters in no time. Although he knew the male lead was awesome, but after seeing it with his own eyes, he was still shocked by the strength of the male lead. After killing the monsters, he teleported back to the guild directly. The old man was also glad that he wasn't the enemy of the male lead. Otherwise, he wouldn't have enough lives to die. Seeing the Nanju bring back a bunch of powerful monster corpses, they were also shocked. After all, these are all S-class monsters. After learning that in the forest, all of this level of monsters, everyone's expressions instantly became serious. On the other hand, the old man followed the sensing. He took the demon lord to the depths of the forest. And the other one was emitting a terrifying aura, telling them to hurry up. Hearing someone challenging him, the demon lord decided to take the old man to see it. And the owner of this breath was the evil god Yalong. Seeing someone approaching him, the evil god Yalong declared the game started, and immediately released all the monsters to make trouble. Seeing this, the demon lord immediately teleported to the city, and then told the male protagonist about it. After learning the situation, Hong Mao and the others stayed here to protect the town, and he followed the demon king to the forest to defeat the evil god. At this time, the leader also rushed over and saw the male lead was there. The captain directly pounced and hugged the male lead. He also received a request from the hero's father. He came here as fast as he could, knowing that the male lead was going to the forest. The leader also planned to go with him, but the male lead asked him to stay here, command the knights and protect his family. Hearing that he was asked to protect his husband's family, the delighted leader agreed without hesitation. After finishing the task, the male lead and the demon king ran towards the forest. Meanwhile, the old man was fighting the monsters in the forest alone. After all, he was also one of the 4 heavenly kings of the demon world. He was still capable of dealing with these level monsters. At this time, the male protagonist and the demon lord also arrived. After throwing a few fire magic spells, the male protagonist also sensed that the evil god Yalong was ahead. So he decided to capture the thief first, and wanted to stop the crisis directly from the source. Then, he asked the demon lord to stay and destroy these cannon fodder. However, after the demon king summoned the 4 heavenly kings, they thought the demon lord summoned them to destroy the world. But the demon lord wanted them to save the world. Just as the 4 doubted that they had heard wrong, the butler, the demon lord's subordinate, told them this was a commission from the apostles of God, and their demon lord had signed a contract with the God's apostle. The 4 heavenly kings were shocked and speechless. Then he started to destroy the little monsters with the demon lord. Meanwhile, the male lead was heading towards the evil god Yanger. While he was using fire magic to destroy these minions, a dragon breath shot towards him. The male protagonist also quickly shot a fire to offset the attack. It turned out that the evil god Yalong had found him. However, because he has not fully recovered his power, he could only humbly possess the body of a black dragon, and felt very angry. After saying that, he shot a group of minions to speed up the process of destroying the world. The male lead wanted to persuade him to lay down his weapons, but the evil god laughed. After all, this is the first time he has heard someone made such a ridiculous request to him, and the male protagonist also felt that it made sense. How could he have the face to say such ridiculous words? Meanwhile, although the demon king and others tried their best to stop, many monsters still ran out of the forest. Fortunately, the red-haired 4 also arrived at this time. The 4 of them also showed their abilities to stop these escaped monsters. They also agreed that they must have a good drink after the battle. The battle on the male lead's side has also begun. The evil god no longer summons minions this time, but used a breath that could petrify people. Seeing this, the male protagonist felt something was wrong. Then the evil god sprayed petrifying breath again. Not daring to neglect the male protagonist, he quickly used super magic to fight back. With only this level of magic, it obviously couldn't cause much damage to the evil god. The male lead wanted to use more powerful D-level magic, but because it needed to charge, the evil god didn't give him a chance. The male lead had to keep his distance first, and then summon 2 divine beasts to help delay time. But in terms of size, the 2 beasts were no match for the evil god. With just a tail swing, it knocked Xiaobai unconscious. Just as the evil god was about to finish him off, Xiaoying rushed over to block the fatal blow for Xiaobai. As the saying goes, teammate dies, he has infinite mana. And, thinking of the many people he wanted to protect, the male protagonist directly broke through the limit. He shot the protagonist's invincible and awesome wave at the evil god. But in the past, the loser was on the left. But the male lead, a cheat, broke this rule. A bright light broke through the sky. The common people thought it was a god descending. At this time, two divine beasts suddenly bit the male lead's trouser leg. Just as the male lead was confused, the demon king also ran over. After all, if they didn't come to stop the male lead, the entire earth would be lost. The evil god was shot by the male protagonist and left nothing. And after his death, the monsters also returned to the forest. That is to say, the male protagonist successfully saved the world. But the king didn't know all this, because yesterday only saw the pillar of light that broke through the sky, so he didn't even think about it. He guessed that the hero did it. The male lead had to tell him that he used D-level magic. The king was really convinced. But after learning that the male lead was to defeat the evil god and save the world, the king was really impressed and planned to marry the princess to him, give him the throne. Of course, this was denied by the duke and the prime minister. So the king had to promote the male lead and gave him a piece of his own territory and officially announced his marriage to the two princesses and the leader of the regiment. But when the wives heard that the non-Jewish territory was Durinter, they were directly dissatisfied. It turned out that this territory had long been controlled by the Adventurers Guild. No one wanted it. Hearing this, the male protagonist realized that he had been tricked. But he wasn't unhappy, but he was excited. After all, there is anything more awesome than building a brand new town. Then, the male lead took his wives to his territory. But the male lead didn't come to the territory as a lord. Seeing new adventurers coming here, the adventurers in the guild, they planned to use the name of welcoming new people to torture him in the name of welcoming newbies. But they didn't know they were dealing with a cheater. He was directly blown away by the male lead. However, he made enemies everywhere, was soon noticed by the guild and church. Of course, all of this was deliberately done by the male lead, on purpose. Then the male protagonist, who regained his territory, was enjoying afternoon tea with his two wives. The devil suddenly crawled out of the ground. Before the devil could speak, the demon lord's wife also jumped out. It turned out that the devil had cheated, was discovered by his wife. So he came to the man with three wives for help. But the man, who was a philanderer, saw that the demon lord's wife was so beautiful. He turned his gun and scolded the devil for his wife. Seeing the devil trying to quibble, the two wives beside the male lead couldn't stand it. They directly scolded the devil. He must have said a lot of sweet words before marriage, so he betrayed after getting married, which is absolutely unforgivable. However, the demon lord hadn't started to reflect yet. The man sitting in the middle had already lowered his head. Those who don't know might think it was the male lead who cheated. The words of the two wives also completely expressed the thoughts of the demon lord's wife. So, after warning the male lead not to cheat like the devil, she took the demon lord back for severe punishment. Finally, the male lead used magic to build a house in his territory, but he accidentally built a castle bigger and better than the king's. Although it was a bit excessive, but he retained the memories of his previous life, and also received the full protection of the gods. He is a nobleman with an awesome rebirth. Of course, the explanation ends here, and you can submit your application for free. Step 1. Like this post. Step 2. Comment with some emojis. Step 3. Share with at least one friend. Step 4. Submit your application here. The link is in the messages section. Good luck, everyone.